Hello everyone. This is the first video I'm shooting and this is for economics. The topic for today's class is consumer and producer surplus. This is in fact a very important topic which students often neglect because it is relatively small. However, this is in fact a subtopic that comes in many chapters, especially in A-level economics. You deal with this chapter first time in economics AS level, microeconomics. However, you're going to deal it further as subtopic in the microeconomics of A level, and it is very important to write in your essays. Even questions on this can come. So let's begin. We're going to start with consumer surplus. In fact, we all know what this is. We have a diagram, a demand and supply diagram. Later, we're going to identify which area is consumer surplus and which area is producer surplus. You're going to help me identify this later. Right now, we're going to begin with consumer surplus. So, what is consumer surplus? Let's try to understand it simply from a consumer point of view. So, a consumer is someone who, what's the aim of a consumer? His aim is to maximize satisfaction, right? So, he buys goods and services to maximize his satisfaction, and he pays for these goods and services. So, a consumer is willing to pay an amount, but the actual amount he pays might be different from the maximum he will be willing to pay. In simple terms, consumer surplus is the extra satisfaction over and above what he actually pays for the quantity consumed of a good. Alright? So consumers are rational and they normally demand goods and services to satisfy their want. Alright? Now, the maximum that a consumer is willing to pay for the good is, in fact, the demand curve. While what he actually pays for the good is the market price where the equilibrium is obtained. Let's look at the diagram and identify further what is the maximum he is willing to pay and what is the actual he is paying. So as you can see, consumer surplus is the potential expenditure minus the actual expenditure. Let us see what is the potential expenditure and what is the actual expenditure. But from what I just said, the potential expenditure is the maximum he is willing to pay. And the actual expenditure is what he actually pays, right? The maximum that he is willing to pay is represented by the demand curve. We're going to see this. We are going to look at the diagram and we're going to see this. And what he actually pays is represented by the market price, by the equilibrium price. So, on this diagram, this is our supply, this is our demand, this is our equilibrium. We're going to see our equilibrium quantity and price later. Now, for 1 unit, let's say this is 1 unit. Quantity 1 unit. What he has the capacity to pay, what he is willing to pay for the good to satisfy himself is in fact, let us put this in dollars, 20. This is what he is willing to pay. What's the maximum he is willing to pay for 1 unit? But let's move on to the second. For the second unit, he is willing to pay, let's say, $18. We move on. For the third, $16. And finally, for the fourth, $14. So as you can see, for the first unit, he is willing to pay $20 and so on. However, what is he actually going to pay? He is actually going to pay $14 for all the units consumed, because this is what we call the equilibrium quantity, and $14 is what we call the equilibrium price. For all units, he is going to pay $14, when in fact we're looking at individual units. He could have paid $20. He was willing to pay $18. He was willing to pay, oh my God, $16. But what he actually pays? He pays $14 for these 4 units. So who is benefiting? Of course he is benefiting. He is saving some money. So he is benefiting in the form of consumer surplus. This consumer surplus is hence the extra satisfaction over and above what he actually paid for the quantity consumed. This, let's use another color. This demand curve helps to show us our potential expenditure, while this shows us our actual expenditure. So what will be our consumer surplus? It's of course going to be this. How about a different pen? Let me shade this as well. Oh no. Still big. So this area is our consumer surplus. All right. I hope this is clear. Let's see again. For the first unit, he has the ability to pay $20. Let's say the producer increases the price to $16. He is still willing to pay $20, so he'll still have a consumer surplus, right? For the second unit, he's willing to pay $18. He benefits from this much. Here, he benefits from this much. Here, from this much. At this point, there's no longer a consumer surplus, right? Now, does consumer surplus change? Of course, I just mentioned it before that if the price increases, if the supplier increases the price, how can a supplier choose to increase price? It is simple. A price increases when supply shifts to the left. So no longer we will have our equilibrium. Here we'll have our new equilibrium at this point, our new equilibrium quantity at this point, our new equilibrium price, $18, below 17 maybe, and our new surplus would be this one. So change in price, change in supply has an effect on the consumer surplus. Likewise, if supply shifts to the left, consumer surplus will increase. All right. So a change in the price is what causes the consumer surplus to change. Another determinant of consumer surplus is PED. I hope you all know what PED is. I'm going to make a video on that soon. PED, that is the price elasticity of demand, is the responsiveness of quantity demanded following a change in price. So it's from the consumer's point of view. The more inelastic the demand curve is, that is, the steeper it is, the greater the consumer surplus, right? And the more inelastic it is, the less the consumer surplus. Because when you have an inelastic demand, what happens is you're willing to pay more and more for the same quantity consumed, right? So the maximum that you're willing to pay is huge, while the actual expenditure is just at the market price, all right? So inelastic, huge consumer surplus; elastic, a small consumer surplus. And what causes consumer surplus to change? It is the price. So, where is consumer surplus situated? Let's say you have a question on that. Consumer surplus is the area above the price line. This is what we call our price line. And below the demand curve. This is our demand curve. Above the price line, below the demand curve, you're going to have this area. All right. So I think I've covered everything for consumer surplus. We have covered the area, what causes it to change, the elasticity, and that's it for consumer surplus. Now, of course, I believe that you can label the area of consumer surplus here on this diagram. So in this diagram, we will say that the consumer surplus is which area? Please think that. You're right. Consumer surplus is this area. And this area is PCE. How are you going to benefit from this consumer surplus when you're writing your essays? You should try to maximum input it into all of your essays. Let's say you're asked, how will a rise in supply or a fall in supply, how will a change in supply overall affect the consumer? So if the effects on the consumer is something we should talk about, we should talk about the consumer surplus. If let's say it's maybe in a market structure, yes, deadweight loss. A deadweight loss occurs when you have a loss in consumer or producer surplus. What happens when there's a rise in price? There's a loss of consumer surplus, right? So in other chapters, when we will do it together, we will have a look at the effect on consumer surplus, which is very important. And just like I will tell you, identify the effect on consumer surplus, you should be able to tell the examiner about your knowledge of consumer surplus and the effect on consumer surplus whenever there's a change in a variable. So let us move on to producer surplus. It is just as easy as consumer surplus. So producer surplus is from the producer's point of view. It's from the firm's point of view. The firm's main objective is maximization of profit. So they want to maximize the revenue they obtain, of course, while minimizing their cost, hence maximizing their profits. They are profit motivated, as we all know. So producer surplus is the extra revenue that a producer gets over and above the minimum he is willing to accept. The minimum he is willing to accept for each unit of a commodity can be shown by what we call a supply curve. Let us have a look, just like we had a look above, about the individual commodities. Let's take a different color now. Let's say for the first unit produced, he is willing to sell it at $2. For the second unit, he is willing to sell it at $4. For the third unit, he is willing to sell it at $6. And for the fourth unit, he is willing to sell it at $8. The minimum expected revenue is shown by the supply curve. For one unit, it's $2 and so forth and so on. However, the actual revenue that he obtains is at this equilibrium at the market price. So, the actual revenue is shown by the price line, which is at the equilibrium price. While the minimum expected revenue is shown by the supply curve. For the first unit, he will be in fact satisfied if he obtains $2 because that's the minimum he is willing to obtain. It's the minimum he expects to obtain. However, if sometimes something goes beyond our expectations in a good way, we are satisfied. This is our surplus, right? So for the first unit, he is expecting $2, but he actually obtains $8. So he is benefiting, he is very happy. So our producer surplus is the area situated below the price line and above the supply curve, giving us an area of this much. So it's like a triangle, just like what we obtained for our consumer surplus. So this is our producer surplus. So it's the minimum amount that the sellers will be willing to accept for the given units of product versus what they actually receive through the market. All right? So it's a surplus for them. What will cause the producer surplus to change? It will be a change in demand. Let's say there is a change in demand, maybe because incomes are rising. So this change in demand will cause a rightward shift of the demand curve. Which will cause the equilibrium price to rise. And this will be our extra producer surplus. So a change in price is what causes a change in the producer surplus. So let's see above what is our producer surplus. I think by now you should be able to identify it. It's very simple. It is this area. Right. This is area LPE. Now, a tip when you're making a diagram to show the consumer the producer surplus, always start your supply curve and demand curve at the y-axis. That is, it should touch the axis so that you can have a solid closed figure, right? If you start, let's say here, you're not going to obtain a closed figure, you'll have an opening here. So to obtain a closed triangle, you should start it always at the y-axis and then go forward. Usually, students tend to start it later. Of course, you lose your marks, but it's more advisable, especially if you're competing. So this is about consumer and producer surplus. Now, this chapter you will also incur when you are going to deal with the topic of government price controls in the form of maximum price and minimum price. I believe it is in the AS level microeconomics, unit 3 maybe. Yes, I think it's unit 3. So there you're going to see what will be the impact of maximum price control and minimum price control on both the consumer and producer surplus. This can come as a form of analysis when you talk that, even as a form of evaluation. Let's say you have to talk about the drawbacks of maximum price control, then you can state the effect on consumer and producer surplus. If, let's say, consumer surplus is falling, consumers will be dissatisfied, there will be a fall in standard of living. If, let's say, there is a fall in producer surplus, producers will be dissatisfied and there will be a disincentive to invest further in the market. This will reduce investment, this will reduce the aggregate demand, real GDP. There's so much to talk about, but very important, do not go away deter from the topic. Many students often go to employment, macroeconomic topics, and forget that the topic is in fact consumer and producer surplus or price controls. So do not go away from the topic. Just like a one line thing you can say about the impact, but evaluation is very important, especially if you're in A levels. Evaluation is the key to secure top marks. And evaluation and analysis include consumer and producer surplus. So very important to master this topic. It's not a difficult topic at all. Just as you saw, we finish it in a jiffy. So you can just you just need to understand the concept. It's not at all necessary for you to understand, to memorize the information that I gave you. It's just important for you to understand it. You can write in your own words. That's the best thing about economics. So that's it for me. For today, we are going to meet next time for another topic. I haven't finalized it yet. This is the easiest and beginner topic that we had for economics. That's why I decided to do it first. If you have any topic recommendation or something that you want to do, you can write it in the comments. I'll try to do it. But for today, this is it. I hope you like the video. Please like, comment, subscribe. You can, if you have any queries, you can put it in the comments. And my sole purpose for today's video was to make the topic easier for you, make you understand in simple terms. You might have a look at it and think that, okay, it's not that difficult. Maybe she did not explain that well. But no, the whole point is that it is, in fact, very easy. I mean, what can possibly be difficult about this? So just try to understand it. Just try to focus. You're going to get it. It's very easy. And do not throw back or expect the minimum out of small topics. Like, ignore them. That is the worst thing you can do. These small topics is what gets you 1 or 2 marks in your essays when you talk about them. So the importance of understanding them is immense. So that's for today. I hope to see you soon in our next video. Till then, goodbye.